Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. Much has happened since our last broadcast. We have all watched the news. We shared emotions as we witnessed peaceful protests and demonstrations turn violent, destructive, and in some cases, dangerous to young, innocent bystanders. Today, in the midst of all of that, we celebrate the life of George Floyd, the man, a father, and a respected member of his community, the one at the center of the nation's current emotional heartbeat. Subsequent events have created a shifting in the nation's moral narrative, a shift bringing much needed attention to systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, a pandemic, and our economy. When we think of how this started, an African-American man being held on the ground by a member of law enforcement with a knee on his neck, a reality which some would say symbolizes the notion that systemic needs have forever been on the necks of people of color since the inception of this country. The emotions from this incident and others like it have mobilized a generation of young people. Just yesterday, President Obama, in his address to the My Brother's Keepers Alliance, reminded us that this country was founded on protest, that some of the most progressive leaders, Dr. King, Cesar Chavez, and Malcolm X, were all young leaders mobilizing, but mobilizing in a constructive way. Tonight, we will talk about civil disobedience, what it means, where can we go from here, and the ways in which the church can respond. And right now, we have a number of, I say, heavy hitters in the race, in the out here doing activist work, and really speaking a voice and having a perspective on the events in terms of how it's affecting our community and the nation worldwide. I'm going to start out. I mean, for those that I've had these guys on my show before, but I'm going to have, for those that are watching for the first time, I'll just have them to give a brief introduction of who they are. Let's see, Reverend Malcom, why don't you start us off and just talk about, just tell the viewers who you are and a little bit about your ministry.
Yeah, so I'm Reverend Michael Malcom. I am the founder and executive director of the People's Justice Council, as well as the executive director of Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. I'm located here in Birmingham, Alabama. I see you put the Senior Pastor Rush Memorial. I'm no longer the Senior Pastor of Rush Memorial. I actually stopped, I resigned from there to do environmental justice work. Gotcha. Full time as a ministry.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where I am now. But thank you.
All right. Let's see. Dr. Fortson, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Paul Q Fortson, elder in the Church of God in Christ, and I'm the founder of the Paradise Community Development Corporation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's here in Forest Park, Georgia. And I also work as the official chaplain for the Fulton County Solicitor General's Office and served as a volunteer chaplain for Clayton County Sheriff, and just what I would like to just call an all-around servant. Want to make sure that that I'm speaking, that my voice for justice and my voice for social justice as well is being heard. So that's just what I like to get my hands in the mud and do some work.
That's right. That we all have a charge to keep and a God to glorify. And
absolutely.
That we were called to do that. Dr. Mason, I'm sure you have a lot of viewers out there that are, you've been quite a celebrity these past few days. So but just for the sake of, conversation, introduce yourself and talk about your ministry.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lara Lane. And as I say on Facebook, everybody can be a star. All you need to have is a computer and a page. But I'm Skip Mason, and I'm the pastor of the West Mitchell Street CME Church that used to look like me.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. I'm the pastor of the West Mitchell Street CME Church in Atlanta, near the Atlanta University Center. I also work as the director of the Voorhees College Library, one of our great HBCUs as well. And I manage a little page on Facebook called Skip Mason's Vanishing Black Atlanta. And I have so many of my wonderful friends and followers who are looking at your show on my watch party. And I tell you, people are very vocal and very vibrant about the issues that are impacting us right now. And I'm so glad to be back on your show to share some perspectives on civil disobedience and the church's involvement.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your involvement. And we're going to jump right into our questions for tonight, our discussion that is for tonight. I think, that, like I said earlier, there's been a lot going on, and it really bears a lot of attention to, there's a time now in our history where we are really, the country is in a stance to address its moral complex, its moral consciousness. And I just want to start out, what is Dr. Mason? Can you define what civil disobedience? What is civil disobedience?
Well, I'm going to define it as I was taught, I believe, in high school when we read some portions of Henry David Thoreau's Resistance to Civil Government, also known as Civil Disobedience. And if you recall, Thoreau published this in 1849. And he simply argued that individuals should not permit governments to overrule their conscience, and that they have a duty to avoid any situations that will enable the government to make them agents of injustice. And I think Thoreau's definition is so apropos to what we are going through right now. Thoreau was kind of motivated to write this essay simply because of his disgust with slavery, and at that time, the Mexican-American War. But it was primarily the issue of slavery that fueled his passion to create this document. And what Thoreau asserted primarily was that because governments, he said, were typically more harmful than helpful, that they cannot be justified, and that democracy was simply just not a cure for it. We live in a democratic society right now, but we still have many issues that are plaguing us, and the people are still oppressed. So that's the basis of it. He says, last point, that the government is not just a little corrupt or unjust in the course of doing its otherwise important work, but Thoreau said that in fact the government is primarily an agent, listen to this, of corruption and injustice. And because of this, it is not too soon for honest men, and let me add honest women, to rebel and revolutionize. And that is what we are seeing right now in the streets. That is what we have seen historically for the last 200 plus years of our existence. We have been witness to and a party to acts of civil disobedience through the era of our abolitionists and through Dr. King and Rosa Parks and others, leading on up to what we are seeing right now. Now, civil disobedience does not mean laundering and looting and destroying. but it is coming against some of the injustices of our government. Our government has failed us in some sense, in many instances, okay, because
Amen.
policies have not been made, police reform, equity in healthcare, and all these other kinds of things. But that's what civil disobedience is, in a nutshell. And we're watching it. And if Gil Scott Heron was here, he would have to change his lyrics and say the revolution is being televised.
Televised. I love it.
Lord have mercy. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And so we said we were going to talk about this a little later, but I'm glad you brought up Thoreau's approach, and he was indeed the first to use that, to coin that phrase. So when we talk about civil disobedience, and all of us, a lot of us have read in the history books, some have actually lived through the civil rights movement. We know that, for example, Dr. King's movement was born out of the church. And so how can we talk about some ways? Why don't you start out by talking about some ways that churches can adopt a type of methodology or pedagogy on, how we can address issues of civil disobedience? Why don't you start off, Dr. Mason?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that the church was that the church helped to birth the movement, and
Right.
and in many instances you are right, because after we were freed, the church became a very crucial fixture in the community. It provided the education, for our people, and the pastor preacher was considered to be the core of the community, and so we shifted to the 1940s and 50s. Adam Clayton Powell used his pulpit, to talk about the injustices of our people, and other preachers as well. And then, of course, Dr. King, who just really wanted to be a professor, and to teach, was thrust into the movement, being in the right place at the right time, the God-given time, with the issues going on with the Montgomery Improvement Association.
Right.
Subsequently, because of his intellect, his ability to articulate, he was elected the president reluctantly, and thrust into this movement, and they led this major civil disobedient boycott for an entire year, which resulted, and the church became the core. I would say to you right now, I'd be hard pressed to find right now where the church has played a major part in the movement in the last 8 days. I'm not talking about pastors.
Well, hopefully we can talk tonight about some ideas or some ways that the church can approach that.
And let me say this quickly. This is not an indictment, okay? I'm just saying things have shifted now. Somebody has been asking on Facebook, where are the pastors?
I heard that.
Well,
I saw that.
I'll indict the church because they haven't, but we'll move on. That's another discussion.
Can I jump in real quick, Dr. Wright? Yes, I think that we've allowed Dr. King to age with us. We forget that Dr. King was a young man. He wasn't an old man. He wasn't an elder. He was a young man. And what I see now is the youth taking charge to say, no, we don't want this future that y'all trying to give us. And instead of us looking at it from a lens of our youth taking the lead to say, we want to build our and name our own future and partnering with them to make that happen, we're busy critiquing them on their methodology of doing what they're doing. But the reality is, Dr. King aged with us. Dr. King aged with my grandfather and my grandmother. And we forget that he was young. And so the revolution, for me, Dr. Skip, it had been televised, because if I look at it, the revolution that we're seeing now is a mentality. The actions of what we're seeing
That's good.
Displayed, but the revolution is a mentality. You young people not scared anymore. We've been sick and tired, but now young folks not scared. I put on Facebook earlier today, white people, y'all better start talking to each other. These young people will take your cookies now.
Listen,
they ain't playing no games. You know, Black lives better start mattering. Your life ain't gonna matter.
Easy.
Reverend Malcolm, let me just say this. There's a picture floating on Facebook. I don't know whether you, Dr. Paul or Dr. Larlene, have seen it, of this sister standing in the middle of a street with a
Kind
car
of burnt.
burning.
Right.
She has a poster that says, "This, we are not my ancestors. This generation will F you blank blank up."
Right.
And so I said, wow. First I said, oh, this is kind of rude. This is kind of disrespectful to the ancestors. They don't know what they went through, da, da, da. But, you know, after hundreds of responses, people said, you know, this is what they're doing now. This is what they see. This is how they are fighting the battles. And they don't, if you're not going to, you know, be with them, then get out of the way. Okay. And that's why I said you need folks who are prayer warriors. We need folks to pray over these children, and we need foot soldiers and folks to be with them because they are on fire right now.
That's right.
And I would even say, in addition, we need instructors. They need instructors.
But they got to listen.
Right.
They got to listen.
What I see is they hadn't quite made that connection of policy change.
Yeah.
That's what Dr. King them understood. Dr. King them took their rage to the White House. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say first to Brother Skip, my comment on your page concerning the young lady was that this doesn't hurt the ancestors. The ancestors, I believe, are proud of these young people. But as it relates to the whole policy piece, I also wrote a piece a couple days ago, is that we've watched, or these young people have watched what has happened in our political system and in the political process, and they have a real belief that their vote does not count. You're right, Bro Mike, that we need to tell them about the political process. Are you registered to vote? I've seen a lot of that. But when they had an opportunity to watch what happened with Stacey Abrams, where the guy who's is actually running the election, then how in the world do they have any faith in this process, in this political process? We do have to, you know, pull them in as it relates to the political process.
Oh, you own it, bro.
You see, when they watched a guy who got 3 million less votes than their opponent still sit in the White House and do this demagoguery that he does, I almost said a bad word. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Is that how can they believe in this political process? I believe that we have a responsibility to them to, I don't know, show them something that says your vote counts. Because other than that, they ready to fight. Other than that, they ready to fight.
Jamal Bryant said, Dr. Larry Lane, that the problem, those of us who are beneficiaries of the 50s and 60s, we came out with integrated buses. We came out with integrated lunch counters and stores. Right. We came out with the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act. Right. We came out with HUD and all of these programs. And so we had wins. And from after Dr. King died, everybody scattered. Everybody started achieving, moving on up to the east side to a deluxe apartment in the sky, getting big houses and living. That's what Ebony was built off of. And so we had wins, but somewhere between Dr. King's death and now we did not, Reverend Malcolm, you said it, Dr. King aged with us, but you know, we just really did not raise that next person. And folks would say, well, we got Obama, that was a win, that was a win. But I listed a picture and it had all of these people who've been killed, and right by it, it had no conviction. It must have been about 20
I saw that too.
And so Pastor Jamal Bryant said, these kids haven't had any wins. They've seen the election system rigged, Paul, as you said. So yes. I'm changing. You know, this week has changed me tremendously in my thought, and not to be so hardcore. I feel these kids. I feel them. God knows. Right. I feel them.
That's right.
And I pray, reverends, that they will get the elder, the direction, you know, that somebody will lead them and guide them so something good can come out of this.
Absolutely. But in order for that to happen, Doc, we've got to start speaking their language.
That's
our issue is we keep on calling for peace. Be peaceful, peaceful protest, peace, peace, peace. And what peace is coming off as is conform.
Say it. I was going to say it.
Yeah.
It's coming off as conform. And now you all may want to be censored about how you talk, and I'm gonna try my best not to disrespect Doc's show, but I believe in using all the language because God gave it all to me. And I'm just gonna say it how I feel it.
Hey, just call it out, Reverend.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Absolutely.
Young people see through our bullshit. Period.
I agree.
Period. And we are delusional if we think that they don't.
That's right.
They see through it.
That's right.
And the reality is the calls for peace are calls for to conform, as well as the calls for peace are calls that say that our old behinds ain't gonna get out there and do anything.
That's right.
And they see that.
They sure do.
And they say, to hell with y'all, we'll make it happen because we don't want the future that y'all trying to give us.
Brother Malcolm, I thought that you were going to say that they see it not just as conformity, but as weak. They see it as weak and soft. And they see it.
I did. I just used bullshit instead. I didn't give it all them ways.
Absolutely. They see us getting slapped in the mouth, as you can see, and then we don't say nothing.
See, you're gonna be okay on YouTube, but Facebook probably gonna cancel my show after y'all.
No, you'll be all right. You'll be just fine. Paul,
I've done a whole lot worse. Trust me.
Listen, I think we're being called to the carpet. We've gotten comfortable. We've gotten settled. And I'll admit. Very early on, I said, okay, the first day of demonstration, I was with it, second day, third. I'm saying, okay, now what's the point? When I say what's the point, meaning what's the end game? Not what's the point of the demonstration and the marches, but I want these kids to be able to have something. Andy Young, and they don't want to hear Andy Young's name. I love Andy, but they don't want to hear, but they need to listen. Andy said they planned months before they went out in March. So there was a purpose at the end. So after all of you're gonna keep marching and keep marching. Good. Okay, but what do you want to get out of it? What do you want to come from this?
Well, see, that is why that is the major reason why I wanted us to also, when we talk about what is, that's why I asked you to define civil disobedience, because hopefully, somebody out there can glean some understanding about, what it is. And contrary to a lot of people's perspectives, there is indeed an art to moral protest. That's right. Just like Andy Young, Ambassador Young was talking about, we planned for months when we did it. It was all planned. It was systematic. It was, and so it was organized. And only thing a lot of people are just remembering, but the change didn't come until things got violent. Right. But the violence, if you think about it, I believe, based on some things that Dr. King said about riots and the occurrence of riots, not happening out of thin air. I believe that the riots were a result of, we had the riots and we had the violence to happen, but that violence came as a result of the peaceful protests. And it was through those peaceful protests that we got an amendment, 1968 Civil Rights Amendment. We haven't had that in over 50 years where we actually amended the Constitution of the United States. That didn't come because people were being violent. Right. That came because of organized nonviolent intervention. And that is why, Dr. Fortson, I really want you to address that whole, in the art of moral protest. James Jasper, in his book, he integrates some diverse examples of this of protests, and he goes back all the way from the 19th century all the way through to recent movements. and he gives an understanding of how social movements, how they actually work. And could you, I just, that's why I wanted you to give some examples. If you can give some examples of how that actually works. Because I know, a lot of people are saying, oh, it ain't, it's not going to happen until we get violent. And that this violence is what's going to change. That is not what's going to change things if they really take an academic or a closer look.
So Dr. Lara Lang, everybody has taken this speech, taken one soundbite, one line from Dr. King's speech, The Other America. He gave this speech weeks before he died, March 14, 1968. And they've taken it so, out of total context because it's more to that. And I just want to share this little brief excerpt. Dr. King said, now I want to say something about the fact that we have lived over these last 2 or 3 summers with agony, and we have seen our cities go up in flames. And I would be the first to say that I'm still committed to militant, powerful, massive nonviolence as the most potent weapon in grappling with the problems from my direct action point of view. I am absolutely convinced that a riot merely intensifies the fears of the white community while reliving the guilt. And I feel that we must always work with an effective, powerful weapon and method that brings about tangible results. But Dr. King says, it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humility.
Right.
That's the context for that statement. And people need to read that and understand. And don't just say it's just the language of the unheard, but read the rest of it and put it into context with what's going on.
Right. So in essence, the riots really just they just bring to light what the issues are, that there is an issue, and this is what the issues are. But go ahead, Dr. Fortson.
I was going to say just to Skip's point, and that's a great excerpt by Dr. King. But when you look at these riots and looking at them in that context, what we also see, and I've heard I heard the voices that said, well, what does looting a Target or looting a Macy's or doing this or that, what does that have to do with the movement? What's the end goal? But what we have done is allow these young people to believe that money is God. We've allowed them to do that. And they are not simply attacking a retail establishment. What they are attacking are symbols of power.
Yeah.
They see these places as the symbol, as the house on the hill or Massa's house on the hill. So at the end of the day, they don't really care about going in there and stealing some $10 t-shirt. What they're trying to do is stick it to these symbols of power. Yes. And what they're thinking, if that's rioting, if it's burning it to the ground, that's what they see as getting their message or the attention that they want in this justice era, in what they've seen. It's not about Macy's. It's not about Target or getting a new TV. They look at those as symbols of power, and they're trying to bring it down.
And now, a few folks do want that big screen, though. Now, come on.
Oh, come on now. Come on. Malcolm, go ahead. You got something.
It's a small prize. That's a small prize for that video we had.
Look, Dr. Fortson that got me all fired up, and then Dr. Skip just poured water all over it.
But where is the lie? Where is the lie?
I got this big screen TV right behind me. I'm trying to find virtual backgrounds I can hide it.
Hey, that's a small price for what we've had to go through in this country, man.
But seriously though, let's look at the bailouts. One. Let me digress.
God bless you.
The first thing is I don't care for that term riot when I'm looking at these acts of liberation. And the reason being is because we've allowed white folk to name how our peaceful protest supposed to look, or how our protesting is supposed to look. And so they riding, and you shouldn't be taking and you shouldn't be looting. When you get billions of dollars, give billions of dollars to corporations, but you only give $1,200 to individuals during a pandemic when they've lost their jobs, and given them no security concerning their bills, concerning their mortgage, concerning their rent. You've got the mortgage people or banks, as well as your rent offices that put people on payment plans, and as soon as things get back, you've got to pay all that back pay, but you hadn't had a job.
That's bad.
Yeah.
That's looting.
Yeah.
That's real looting. That's you have looted the public. So don't tell me anything about looting and condemning looting if you're not going to talk about that piece.
Wow.
If you're not going to condemn what the government has done, don't talk to me about looting. Don't talk to me about my acts of liberation. And somebody said it earlier. I bet you our ancestors jumping up and down. Let me call one of our ancestors, if you will. I'll be a preacher for a minute. Come here, Nat Turner. Ain't nowhere in the world you gonna tell me Nat Turner ain't happy about what's happening. He started
Call the roll, brother. Call it.
Absolutely.
Again, we've allowed for Dr. King to age with us. What Dr. King did was brought something brand new to the table and said, hey, try this method. And he got it from Gandhi. And you best believe Gandhi said, hey, this is a method. If it don't work, bring them guns out.
Bring the guns out.
Yeah, that's true.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, come on. We married ourselves to this method. And it did get us a whole lot. But at the same time, they stripping it all away.
Yeah.
Look at the EPA rollbacks. But when you look at the EPA rollbacks, juxtapose that to the communities that suffer from pollution.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We are not protected. And we're not protected in the midst of COVID. They don't care about Black bodies.
That's right.
So why should we give a damn about theirs?
Right. And here's the other piece to that too. We talk about this nonviolent, or we talk about this quote unquote peaceful protest, whatever that is. They watched Colin Kaepernick. They watched Cap kneel, and the brothers that came out in support of him, and the ones that came out in support of him. And then they watched that same system blackball him.
Yeah.
For that peaceful protest. Well, if this is the way you're gonna treat me when I protest peacefully, where do you get a load of what I do next?
That's right. And I'm sure that Colin Kaepernick is just sitting back,
Right,
counting his Nike money.
Yeah.
And I ain't mad at him
at all.
because he tried to tell the folks. And yes, Drew Brees, bless your heart. I'm gonna go out on by myself. I'm gonna forgive you because I'm a preacher and I got to forgive you. You won't be at our picnics anymore. You didn't think about what you were saying, caught up in this moment of trying to be in America. And for the record, your grandparents were not the only ones that fought in World War I and World War II. Most African Americans have a grandparent, a great grandparent, including yours truly, who not only fought in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and all of the wars leading up. So that was a horrible, uninformed, ill thought out comment for him to make during this time. And I'm so glad to see some of our Black athletes step up, and discuss honestly their feelings and call him to the carpet, because that's what we got to do now. That's what these kids in the street doing. They are calling America to the carpet, And we have had enough. And I think Reverend Paul, you said it, that Target and Walmart, these stores, it's not so much that they want it. It just represents the oppressive or oppressors of our society. And that's what that's all about. And America's going to turn a different corner with all that's going on right now. As Al Sharpton so eloquently said today at the memorial service, that America's foot has been on the neck of Black folks for 401 years.
That is the truth. That is the truth. And every time we see that picture of George Floyd laying down with that police officer's knee on his neck, that we are reminded of that illustration. That picture has so many symbols, says so much symbolism. It's more than just seeing that law enforcement officer with his knee on his neck.
That's right.
Symbolizing the systems that have been working against not just African American, people of color, people who are not, including those that are not native to this country.
Right.
We've seen the different systems have their knees on the backs of everybody's neck. So
that's right.
That
Dr. White.
Yes, sir.
Let's not get lost on the symbolism of that officer with his hand in his pocket
and a smirk on his face.
Don't let it lost on the symbol. 80% of what we are trying to convey is body language, not what come out of our mouth or what we do. His hand in his pocket told us the casual nature.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
To a deeper swamp level.
Yeah.
In the sense that he put his hand in his pocket while this man died. That was symbolism of a monumental level. Let's not understate that.
Another day's work, another nigga dead and gone off the street.
Nigga dead.
Go home, and to his wife, who was obviously miserable because she divorced him, filed for divorce the next day. Pray it last for her as well. But Dr. White, one of my viewers viewing the watch party on your show said, would you discuss the importance of boycotting? Are you going to talk about that this evening?
Why don't you talk about it?
Well, hey, I think we ought to throw it in the air.
Yeah.
And what does boycotting, though, for me, should be organized.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Strategic. With a plan and purpose. That's all I'm saying. And what do we? If we all listen, if we all came together, all of us Black folks, color folks, we could do something.
Dr. Skip, unfortunately, and it's sad to say that I feel this way. And like you, I'll step out on the limb and say I may not be the only one, but our addiction to capitalism and consumerism.
That's my point.
Will not allow for us to come together and boycott anything.
Yeah, you're right.
And until we can deal with and be delivered from that whole mentality of consumerism and capitalism that's so deeply embedded in us.
Yeah,
that's right.
And here's the thing: I've had an opportunity to do some reading, and I was reading about how the whole consumerism and capitalism started, and the church was the huge proponent of it at the time of the Industrial Revolution. They took hold of it and started with the whole rugged individualism and all of this stuff, and allowed for people to start looking at consumerism and capitalism as God. And literally, the evangelical church literally fought social reform because they were going against the New Deal.
So, hey, brother Malcolm, I'm gonna jump in right here because I believe that's that whole idea of us allowing these young people to see Target and Jordans and all of these places as symbols of power. But I believe it was Hobbes who reasoned early on in the history of this country, how do we decide who should be the leaders of our culture and our society? How do we decide? And the answer was returned and reasoned back. We decide by looking at those who have accumulated the most wealth, because obviously the hand of God is on their lives if they were able to accumulate this kind of wealth. And from that time, that's how they have allowed those who are affluent or wealthy to be looked at and viewed as more anointed, as right, as the voices of what is right. And then further, what made them the target when we got to speak against injustice is what made that the target. But you're right, Brother Malcolm. I don't know how we address what we've embedded and culturated into our kids as money or capitalism as God. That's a ridiculous notion. It's an absolute ridiculous notion.
It is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think that they're saying that. I think that issue is not their issue. That's our issue.
Oh,
if I look at like Fridays for Future, which I'm one of the organizers for the faith group with the whole climate strikes.
Okay.
And so I deal with a lot of the young people and stuff like that, and dealing with that. And it's a diverse group. So I'm not just dealing with, all Black people. I deal with all people. And when I listen at them, they are more concerned about cleaning up our mess than they are about advancing this notion of progression.
Yeah.
They understand that the bubble can only get so big before it'll bust.
That's right.
Yeah.
And in addition to, you can't leave anybody out.
Yeah.
If COVID hadn't taught us as Black folk anything, and it should have taught everybody the same thing, you cannot divorce yourself from community. You will not survive.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
The reason why the spread of COVID has been so bad is because we don't live as community. We live as individuals. Wow. So as long as I'm safe, I'm not worried about anybody else.
That's true. That is so true. So Reverend Al has called the March on Washington for August 28th, all right, to commemorate not only just the anniversary of the March on Washington, but to rally folks up there.
Right.
And did you see that? So that's going to be interesting, because here's what it says. So who is America's? Who's the spokesperson? Who's the moral leader for African Americans? Now, who are we listening to? Right. Reverend Barber, Reverend Al, are there pastors? I mean,
it's going to be interesting to see who there's because we got some big, we got 4 big mouths right here on right here live. But there are a number of persons, a number of activists that have stepped up. The lawyers for those kids that were tased this past weekend.
That's my lawyer too, also.
Really, so they're speaking up, and so there are a number of us. So it's going to be interesting to see in the next few months, who how that cream will rise to the top. And it might be that we might not have just like one or two. It may be a few that are just leading the pack, and it may not necessarily that leadership position may not come as vivid as we're looking for.
But I would just push back for a second, because right now, of these matters as it relates to the killing of unarmed Black men, peer and women, Reverend Al seems to emerge, in these situations as a voice. He has a platform, all right? Sure. He has a huge platform, the National Action Network, the MSNBC, okay? He's a Black preacher. He's a preacher at heart, okay?
We also have Dr. Barber.
We have Dr. Barber. Barber shake, rattle, and roll, and is a preacher par excellence. But I'm saying that movements as we talked about the art of moral protest, our book that we probably have read in class, but at any rate, movements require leadership.
Right, absolutely.
You can't move. You can't. They got people. That's the power of Moses.
And see, I would argue that if we want to identify one or two people that are going to lead that pack, lead that motion, they are going to have the ingenuity. They are going to have the intellectual bandwidth to be able to organize, to make a statement, to organize and mobilize a number of people.
And they got to get along.
Well, that's where I'll jump in, Dr. Skip. Well, two things. One, I personally think that the world is too big for one leader at this point.
Right.
And during the civil rights era, they didn't have social media, they didn't have computers, they didn't have all of the stuff that we have now. So I think that being that we have what we have, remember the movement was a small group of people. It wasn't a whole lot of folk. There was a whole lot of folk against them, but that was a small group of people. Right. And so, and even in that, Dr. King's speeches highlighted, but there were more speakers at the March on Washington.
Yes.
In Birmingham, you don't see as much Dr. King as you see Fred Shuttlesworth. So who was the leader of the movement in Birmingham? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I really believe that if we try to get one leader, I think that we leave ourselves short.
Right. And the other
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc. Okay, I'll stop. I'm saying too much.
No, this is the platform for you to talk. I'll okay. What I want to say.
So when it comes down to Dr. King and the group of leaders that were with him and that worked with him, everybody had their own place and worked in their own place. Dr. King was a front runner, but you got to remember that was Bayard Rustin, who advised him.
But he Bayard, Dr. Malcom was behind the scene, but he orchestrated. Right. Yeah, you're right. He orchestrated. Right. But here's what I'm saying, Doctor. Go ahead, Dr. Larry Lane.
I was just gonna say that I see. We all know from our ministerial training that everybody has a gift. And so Dr. King, it could be, and I wasn't there. I just read the history books. Yeah. But it could be that Dr. King was the one in the midst of all that had he was the better speaker than everybody else.
Charisma.
The more eloquent speaker.
But don't just narrow him down to the best speaker.
I'm not doing that, Dr. Mason. What I'm saying to you is that everybody has to operate in their gift.
That's right.
And without a doubt, the names that we've mentioned, they all have their strengths. Yeah. It could be, and none of us were there, but we see the evidence. We do see evidence that everybody had their own strength.
Great teamwork from all the individuals, the men and the women. Okay,
right.
But the voice of that movement was Dr. King when it came to voicing. Now, my good friend, attorney Tobe Johnson, who's listening, he said, at that time there were only 4 television networks. Right. Probably 3, and now we have 100, and social media. Let me tell you who the real leader of the movement. Social media.
Wait.
Facebook.
Let me
Facebook, Instagram. Facebook.
To make a point about that, and again, I go back to my notion that everybody has their own gift, and likewise, not everybody is going to reach all people, and so. Reverend Sharpton will reach a certain demographic. So and he may be powerful for that particular age group or that particular generation. What we're going to have to see is someone that can reach other generations. And it might not be just, we've said that, it might not be just one person, but there'll be multiple people. There's going to be somebody that can reach women more effectively than others. There's going to be somebody that can reach the I always say it wrong. The
LBGT.
Thank you, Reverend Malcolm. There's going to be someone that can reach that demographic.
I agree. I totally agree.
So we have to have, because we have we're in a different time than the original civil rights movement, then we're going to have to approach civil disobedience and the notion of activism, that type of activism.
So different leaders, Reverend Dr. White. I'm sorry, Paul. Let me just say the different leaders, but the message has to be the same.
Absolutely.
If the message is not clear, okay, it may be some deviation, if the message is not clear. America, what is our message right now? You got folks in every state, in the streets and countries. Did you see the pictures from Paris? Did any of you all see the pictures from Paris? Yes. My God, in New Zealand, okay, if police brutality is the message, that's the tip of the iceberg, and then you got health inequality, all of that. But the message, we got to be on point with our message. That's all I'm saying, Paul.
And our demand.
Let me say this about what you said about the leadership by committee, everybody playing their role. Here's the deal. At the end of the day, they were okay with the role that they were playing.
Right.
At the end of the day, they did what they did, King. He was a great thinker, Dr. Mason. He was a great thinker, but he was good and that charismatic tone, his cadence, drew people in. But when you talk about the others who were organizing, they were okay. Everybody nowadays, it seems like everybody want a monument in Washington. And at the end of the day, they're not willing to play that role. You got it, or at least do their part. Here's the other piece, is that they also allowed young people, and I'm not talking, they were in their 30s, but I'm talking about they had elementary school students. It was controversial. It was tough. It was hard to swallow. But we have to also we got to corral these young people to be a part of this leadership moving forward. We talk about leadership by committee. We can't just let them be the object of our dictates, if that makes sense. They got to be young people.
But
it can't be his own. I'm sorry.
Dr. Fortson, again, I don't want to romanticize it. Those young people weren't welcome when they first started. They weren't welcome when they first started. That was conflict. They just said, we're going to do it anyway, and y'all can either get on board or y'all can get run over. And they had to get on board, just like they're doing right now. Again, we've allowed Dr. King to age with us. We don't look at the history. So we just, and in addition, we've allowed Dr. King's image to be painted by others.
Oh.
And that's a problem. Just like there was a Dr. King, there was a Malcolm X. We don't hear a whole lot of celebration about Malcolm X outside our community, but everybody keep trying to throw Dr. King in our face.
Yeah. That's them.
And they throw in the utopian Dr. King in our face. They don't throw the after the murders of those 4 young girls.
Yeah.
When he started saying, I really think that I might have integrated my people into a burning house.
Into a burning house, right?
Well, okay. So now let me shift the conversation just a little bit, because this is outstanding dialogue. This is exactly why Perspectives On was created. It was created to give everybody an opportunity to give their perspective on these types of issues. So, but we're all preachers, right? And we all, our orientation into civil rights and social justice, born out of our faith and our commitment that we made to God to keep that charge and to glorify Him through our work, right? That's right. So what I want to pick your brains on tonight is what can the church do to respond constructively to this crisis? Talk to a group of pastors right now. What would we encourage those pastors to do? How and to assign this as a priority in their congregations?
So
you mentioned earlier, I think your question was, and I wrote it down, what do we have to do to develop a pedagogy, an education system in our churches? And what I would say, it would be as simple as looking on the other side of that pulpit, that podium you standing at. And if you're looking out there on the other side of that podium and you seeing black faces, then it should not be hard for us to develop a pedagogy of social justice. Either they blind or they stupid. I don't, either they blind or they.
But keep in mind, Dr. Fortson, that remember we talked about Dr. King's movement was a grassroots, that civil rights movement was a grassroots movement. And what my mentors, as a matter of fact, the Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley served as a major mentor for me. And one of the things he always tells me is that pastors tend to have their priorities, and so this may not necessarily what it seems that to a vast majority of pastors these days, their focus is on getting in their churches so they can have in-person worship.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we had this same group of pastors, what would we say to them in terms of how can you address this? What is it that you can do?
First of all, I want to jump into that quickly because Dr. Love Henry Welchel, distinguished church historian at the ITC.
Yes, sir.
My God.
From him. He said if a black preacher on Sunday morning is not preaching about the social justices of blac folks, he ain't saying much. Okay. And so that's supposed to be a part of, first of all, preachers shouldn't be doing anything new or special. They ought to be talking about the injustices and tying it in biblically every Sunday morning.
Mason, that's us, right? But what are we gonna say to those pastors who still talking about prosperity?
So I'd like to interject.
We let Malcolm use a cuss word right now. And I'm gonna run and get me a glass of Stella Black on this one because so I got prosperity right now. Lord have mercy.
Yeah.
When are we gonna get back to our church in our churches? And that's the priority right now. So how do we?
I can only answer that by painting a picture of what I dream. And I dream of us going back to a place where we are social again and where we believe in community. And something concrete that can happen for us as pastors, as church leaders, that we can do right now. Why don't you, as a pastor that has a congregation, partner with a nonprofit in your community to support them, not just in name, but support them in action, support them in funding,
mobilize.
Right. Why don't you get your congregation to covenant with them to say whenever you have something going on, we're gonna make sure our congregation shows up.
Right.
To ensure that your numbers are where they need to be so you can get further funding. And since we're doing that, why don't we just go in on some grants together so we can set some programs up together for the community? And then your church gets out in the community instead of being in the four walls. And believe it or not, your church will grow.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
So for me at West Mitchell Street, we are right in the heart of the AU Center. But there are tons of churches. You got Central, you got Flipper Temple, you got Friendship, you got my buddy Reverend Grissom's church on Northside Drive. You got a lot of churches within that area. You got what's the church on the corner? Dr. Eric Hurst is the pastor, Mount Moriah. So you got plenty of churches within the AU Center. Now, I know that most of these schools are going to be virtual in the fall. I get that and I understand that. But I want West Mitchell to be that friendly neighborhood church. I want our doors to be open. In fact, I have a couple of students who've called me saying that they want to hold some kind of meeting, at the church. I'm going to talk to them. We're going to try to work this out given the COVID-19 and CDC issues that we have, but we got to be open. I want West Mitchell to be able to support the efforts and ideas of any student movement within the AU Center, one that is looking for a place to meet. Let's say they can't get a place on campus, looking for a place to meet, a place to assemble. I want us to be able to support them and to know that they have our undivided, support, because every church has to do what fits them and their geography and their terrain, so if we can continue to open ourselves up. Morris Brown is, we virtually own the campus, and Morris Brown hopefully will get its accreditation back and continue to rebuild, but we need to be available. That's the message that I'm sending to them. When we are able to financially support their movement, if they need $500 for a permit or something along that line or whatever it is, I want to be able to say, we're going to put some money aside to support these kids, because that's really what happened during the earlier movement. Churches and folks came together, mothers, grandmothers, they made lunches, and provided. They got folks out of jail. Mr. Norris Herndon, who was the son of the founder of Atlanta Life Insurance Company, was a millionaire. He was the one that got all of these civil rights workers, Mr. Jesse Hill. So, and that tied Bethel into it. Now, Sunday, there's a march on Sunday. Are you familiar with that, Larlene?
Yes.
Because it's coming, and it's at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
Tell us about it. Tell us about it.
I'm gonna let her tell her, but let me say this. When I first saw the flyer, I said, wait a minute, 11 o'clock, that's communion.
That's right.
That's church hour. But then I thought about it. The Lord said, just calm down. Let those who want to march will be out there to march. What I heard the Lord saying, some of y'all, you need to just come on out the building anyway and get in line, out the church and march. But it's starting from Laura Lane's church, Bethel. So I know she can tell you about it.
So those of you who are familiar, we have now. I just want to brag a little bit about the AME Church, because one of the things that President Obama said yesterday in his town hall meeting is that this country was founded on protest, and I want to say that the African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded on protest as well.
Absolutely.
So social activism and social justice and mobilization is a part of our history, not just from Richard Allen and what happened in Philadelphia, but throughout the history of African Methodism. So here we are again. Okay, so I just want to put a little tidbit about African Methodism. But there is a peaceful protest rally that is being planned for that's being sponsored by our Young Adult Council of the AME Church, and it will start at Big Bethel Church at 220 Auburn Avenue on this coming Sunday, and it starts they'll be marching from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. and they will assemble at 10 a.m. at the Big Bethel parking lot. And basically, they're assembling so that they can demonstrate, do the same peaceful demonstration, based on what's been going on in Atlanta. So that's basically what it's
really
now.
cool.
Let me ask you this: what is the purpose of the march?
The purpose of the march is to I think they're demonstrating. It doesn't really. It's just millennials of faith against anti-blackness, and it's a peaceful protest rally.
Okay.
And so a lot of grassroots groups are, as you all know, are staging protests, peaceful protests in downtown Atlanta. And for those of you who are not familiar with Big Bethel locality, we are located in downtown Atlanta on Auburn Avenue. And so the premise, the plan is, I'm not a part of the planning committee on it, but I'm gathering from the information that was given to me that the premise is to demonstrate based on what has happened, particularly to those students this past weekend.
Historically, Bethel was the site of most of the major mass meetings in Atlanta. during the civil rights movement, because it was one of the largest, as they called it, auditoriums, sanctuaries. And so most of the major movements with Dobbs and King and A.T. Walden, between Big Bethel and between Wheat Street, those were the largest, and every week they would gather, strategize, and plan, and then got into the streets.
And this would be before there's the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference headquarters is directly across the street from Wheat Street. And so before they built those headquarters, then you're right. You're absolutely right. Between Big Bethel, mostly Big Bethel, more so than Wheat Street. That was the place where we had several meetings. Dr. King spoke there many times. We cried too, way before my time. But yes, so you're absolutely right, Dr. Mason. Big Bethel was almost like the beacon of social justice.
But Wheat Street was big because you cannot forget the works of Reverend Borders.
That's correct.
Borders was talking about civil rights and doing things that most preachers weren't doing.
So wait, so now let's get back on track now, and let's take a few more minutes.
Don't cut me off like that, because I'm talking about Borders.
You got your own show. It's my show.
Okay.
Get your show back, Dr. White. Get your show back.
That's right.
Thank you.
Y'all culture preachers, shut up. Hush your mouth. Y'all don't run this.
It sound like some shade over there.
Wait, I want to say too.
There go the spirit.
And I hope they're watching. The women's emphasis committee. We had Bible study, and we had a very good discussion night before last on how churches can respond to what has happened. And so one of the things that we talked about doing as a group was to really find some ways that we can be more intentional, go out, get some more training, and so that we can create some programming that can reach at-risk youth, and we can teach them and educate them on how to protest, how to the importance of the vote. We want to be able to educate people and create awareness about effective nonviolent intervention. So that was one of the things that we came up with in terms of how the church can respond. Yes, Dr. Fortson.
One of the things, as we get ready to land this plane, one of the things that I don't want to go unstated is those of us as trained practitioners of the gospel ought to remember, and that is, while we are organizing and marching, that care has to come into the picture. Those of us who are trained, this is traumatic. These young people, you see them, and some of the older ones, old like us, need counseling. We need to be able to have access to care practitioners of color. We need to be able to see some Black counselors as well during these moments, so that we are able to process, so they are able to process this stuff as well, and not, this is trauma. Watching that video was trauma. Seeing all of these things happen is trauma. And I think we need to also make sure that those of us who are trained practitioners also at churches provide care. They need to have a place to come after all of this is done, and they need to talk to somebody.
That's a great idea, to provide a platform for young people, and not just young people, but I think we were all affected by
all of us
in some kind of way. And you're right, and to provide a platform within the church for people to come and get some support at this time. Yeah, because we're in a double whammy. We're dealing with a pandemic where our social lives have been dramatically impacted, and then on top of that, we see these crimes being held, and now we're on curfew. We've got a national leader, threatening military martial law, and so that we're in a crisis here. We're in a crisis, and so and it would also be good, Dr. Fortson and Reverend Malcom, Dr. Mason, that if we had we need a support group for those members of those wounded healers, those persons that are in the clergy as well, because we're charged with having to minister to people, and we're in the midst of it ourselves. We're having to rationalize and find some meaning. And where is God in all of this? And what is God trying to tell us? And how is he trying to use me? All of those questions are coming into play as we think through this ourselves. And so you're on to something, Dr. Fortson, when you talk about that.
Walter Brueggemann, and when he talks about the Psalms, he talks about orientation, disorientation, and reorientation.
Right.
I think that we as a society are disoriented. And in addition to us being disoriented because of COVID, we also are experiencing trauma. And so I think all of society is affected, but in particular, Black folks are suffering even more. It's like Malcolm X said, when America has a cold, Black folk got the flu.
That's right.
And so I think it's doubly impacted because of the lack of care for and concern for Black and brown bodies, or in particular Black bodies right now.
That's right.
That impacts what we already were experiencing. When you've got over 60 million people unemployed right now,
wow,
the world is America is disoriented. And the truth be told, probably about 30% of your people in your church are affected by this.
Jesus.
Directly affected. And if you don't address that in a practical sense, you're not meeting the needs of your people.
That's right. That's right. Say that.
And that's why there's so many people in the streets now.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, because these are the ones who are unemployed. Well, not all of them, but there's a large percentage of people who are unemployed. Those who have been holed up for the last 2 months.
That's right.
And I mean, I'm saying, my God, look at all of the people all over the world. So they embody that demographic. But I too was traumatized by that video. Last week, I just went through something inwardly that I could not quite put my hand on, other than the fact that I was just traumatized. And I remember Dr. Joyce DeGruy. I read a lot of her when I was working on my dissertation project. She talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome, and we all embody, the effects of our ancestors generations later. We still haven't fully healed, from the symptoms and the systematic oppression of being enslaved and post Civil War, Jim Crowism, the whole 9 yards, segregation. Emmett Till's death was kind of the turning point, the era of lynchings and public hangings. All of that, we've embodied that. And so, we were already feeling some kind of way about Ahmaud Arbery's death in the street.
That's right.
Those who watched it, who were able to watch it, because I saw it once and I could not watch it again, and I regret but I had to see it, just hear the gun, and it was loud, and pow, and then he went down like that. So we had not totally healed from that, and then you see this man,
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor.
Don't forget Breonna Taylor.
Don't forget Breonna Taylor out of Louisville, Kentucky. Okay, and that battle of bullets, and then George Floyd, and for the world to see this man's knee on this man's neck until he died, and to hear him call out to say he can't breathe. And I believe there's an old tradition. Old folks say that, and Al kind of alluded to it, that when you're dying or transitioning, an ancestor will come and get you.
Yeah.
Okay, and meet you. And I had a friend who I was visiting him, and he was in that stage, and he was calling out names. I had a cousin just a few months ago. She was calling out Mama and Aunt B and all of these relatives. And I'm saying they in the room right now, saying, "Come on." So when he called out his mama's name, I just got to believe his mama was right there.
Get him.
Say, "Come on, baby, just get on. Get through this, And so, look, we just kind of messed up right now.
I want to disoriented.
But
we're disoriented,
Yes,
and it's not just our congregations that are disoriented. We are disoriented.
That's right.
Right.
So let's also remember self-care in the midst of this.
Yes.
You know what I mean? All of us. Listen, I had to take a few days just to be quiet because what was coming out my mouth. I had one of my preacher buddies and plenty of people that are watching knows who he is. So I won't say his name because that'll only indict me. But he stopped by the house the other day, and we're standing outside, man. And listen, the way we were talking, you wouldn't have thought we were preachers.
That's right.
And it was really because both of us have rage. We are in a state of rage behind all that's going on.
Yeah.
And at that moment, we just needed to vent our rage, man.
Yeah. I agree.
And for me, that was a part of self-care. Once I got all them cuss words out of me, I allot myself for so many a day. And once I used all of them in that one setting, I was good from then on.
On them first, I'm with you. I'm with you, brother Malcolm.
A glass of Crown and chill for the rest of the day. I'm sorry, I should say that.
Listen, I'm with you. On those first couple days, I was saying it too. I was saying, I hope they burn it to the ground. I hope they burn everything to the ground. Yeah, I had a few choice words too, but I get it.
Listen, gentlemen, I'm. This was some marvelous. This was fabulous dialogue. I thank you for your commentary. I thank you for your perspective. And what can I say? I'm speechless. It's always good as a Black woman. You know, we have a set of dynamic issues that we deal with, but it's always refreshing for gentlemen and preachers such as yourself to share your perspectives, to give everyone, but in particularly African American women of color, a perspective of what is going on in the minds of our Black men. And I think each one of you have presented that tonight, and for that I am eternally grateful. And you know, I'm going to invite you back. It's going to be plenty for us to talk about for the rest.
We'll talk Jasper. We'll talk Jasper the next time. Huh?
So on that note, we're going to close out, and in the words of famed poet James Baldwin, in his 1962 letter from A Region in My Mind, he says, "Do not falter now on our duty. We may be able, handful that we are, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world." Until next time, we say goodbye. We encourage you to stay woke and remember those words from Dr. King, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Welcome to Perspectives On, where we're giving the world a voice. We are a faith-based social justice forum where individuals give their perspectives on various topics. It's an opportunity to express their viewpoint, their stance, and their angle on justice issues affecting the community and globally. Each episode features guests presenting their perspective on things like climate change, the church, urban farming, and food insecurity, all through a unique faith lens. Come check us out. Give us your perspective.